Duke Julian Ashford sold his wife's stud farm during the annual Cavalry trials and presented it to his mistress before Eleanor's own grooms. He declared that Duchess Eleanor had falsified breeding records, ruined the estate's bloodlines, and forfeited every right to the horses she had raised. Eleanor watched Lady Seraphina Vale fasten Eleanor's silver breeding whistle around her own throat. Then she turned to the assembled officers and stated, calmly, that no horse carrying the Hawthorne mark would leave the estate under her guarantee. Within an hour, her brother, Colonel Marcus Harcourt, froze every War Office order attached to Julian's name. Without those contracts, Ashford could not pay the mortgage due in 21 days. But financial ruin was not the danger that brought Eleanor back to the foaling barn that night. A terrified stable boy had found 6 horses burning with fever, and each bore a fresh inspection brand approved under Eleanor's stolen seal. Someone intended to send them into the king's cavalry before sunrise. 11 days earlier, Eleanor had awakened before dawn to the sound of a mare striking the wall of her stall. She crossed the darkened courtyard with her cloak thrown over her nightdress, following the frantic blows into the eastern stable. A chestnut mare named Patience stood drenched in sweat, her breath coming in short, violent bursts. She had been healthy when Eleanor examined her the previous evening. "Open the upper vents," Eleanor ordered, "and bring clean water, not from the yard pump." Thomas Reed, the 17-year-old stable boy, hesitated beside the door. "Mr. Dacre ordered us to keep them closed, Your Grace. He said the night air weakens the lungs. Mr. Dacre has never delivered a foal or treated a fever." "Open them," the boy obeyed. Eleanor ran her hand beneath the mare's jaw and felt the swollen glands. There was a sharp, unfamiliar odor on the animal's breath, faintly sweet beneath the sourness of illness. When Patience stumbled, Eleanor caught the halter and steadied her. "How many?" Thomas lowered his voice. 3, coughing in the south row. 2 stopped eating yesterday. Mr. Dacre told us not to trouble you." Eleanor's eyes moved toward the closed office at the end of the passage. Rupert Dacre had arrived 3 months earlier as Julian's new master of horse. He had no military experience, no breeding credentials, and a habit of altering instructions after Eleanor had signed them. Julian had appointed him at Lady Seraphina Vale's recommendation. "Separate every animal showing symptoms," Eleanor said. "No shared buckets, no tack leaves this building. And send a rider to Dr. Pembroke." Thomas remained still. "What is it?" "His Grace dismissed Dr. Pembroke yesterday." For a moment, Eleanor heard only Patience scraping one hoof across the straw. Julian had not mentioned dismissing the veterinarian who had served Hawthorne Stud for 19 years. She entered the office and found the cabinet containing her medical journals unlocked. Several pages had been removed from the quarantine ledger. Worse, her brass inspection seal, the one required to certify horses for military purchase, was missing from its velvet-lined box. Eleanor closed her hand around the empty case. At breakfast, Julian sat beneath his father's portrait, reading a letter sealed with crimson wax. Lady Seraphina occupied the chair to his right, the place traditionally reserved for the Duchess. She wore a pale riding habit and smiled as Eleanor entered in mud-stained boots. "You have dismissed Pembroke," Eleanor said. Julian did not look up. "Dacre believes his methods are outdated. Dacre believes opening a window causes lung fever. That is precisely your difficulty, Eleanor. Every disagreement becomes a declaration of war. 6 horses are ill, my seal is missing, and pages have been torn from the quarantine ledger." Now Julian raised his eyes. There was no surprise in them, only irritation. Seraphina placed one delicate hand upon his sleeve. Perhaps the seal was misplaced. The Duchess has been under considerable strain. Eleanor ignored her. No animal leaves Hawthorne until the illness is identified. I have promised 40 mounts to the 12th Dragoons, Julian said. Their officers arrive for the trials next week. Then you will inform them of the delay. I will do no such thing. Eleanor stepped closer to the table. Those horses carry my certification. They carry my name, and soldiers will carry the consequences. Julian folded the letter with deliberate care. You speak as though Hawthorne belongs to you. The sentence struck harder than she allowed him to see. When Eleanor had married Julian 12 years earlier, Hawthorne Stud had been a collection of indebted stables and exhausted broodmares. Her dowry had repaired its roofs. Her family's connections had secured its first cavalry trial. Her judgment had produced the bloodlines that now supplied 4 royal regiments. Yet the land belonged legally to the Ashford estate, and Julian had recently begun reminding her of that fact whenever Seraphina was present. Eleanor straightened. The breeding stock was purchased through my marriage settlement. The contracts depend upon my personal guarantee. You may own these walls, Julian, but you cannot command my name. A cold smile touched his mouth. We shall see. Seraphina lowered her gaze to hide her satisfaction. That afternoon, Eleanor sent a coded message to her brother at the War Office. She did not ask Marcus to intervene. She asked him to locate every transport order issued under the Hawthorne mark during the previous 3 months. Then she inspected the feed room herself. The grain appeared clean, but behind a stack of oat sacks she found a small blue bottle without a label. Its cork carried 2 deep scratches, as though someone had opened it with a stable knife. When she lifted it, a sweet chemical smell rose from the residue inside, the same odor she had detected on Patience's breath. Footsteps sounded outside. Eleanor slipped the bottle into her cloak just before Rupert Dacre entered. You should not be here alone, Your Grace, he said. It was not concern. It was warning. I might say the same to you. His gaze dropped briefly to the pocket where the bottle rested. Then he smiled. His Grace wishes to see you in the Great Hall. Several gentlemen have arrived from London. Who are they? Creditors. Eleanor found Julian waiting beneath the marble staircase with Seraphina, 2 solicitors, and the manager of Vale and Company. On the table between them lay the deed to Hawthorne Stud. Julian placed his hand upon it. My debts fall due in 21 days, he said. Lord Vale has offered enough to preserve Ashford Hall. Eleanor looked from him to Seraphina. In exchange for my farm. In exchange for an asset you have grievously mismanaged. One solicitor opened a second document. Attached to it was a report bearing Eleanor's stolen seal. It accused her of concealing disease among the cavalry stock. Julian met her eyes and made the choice that would destroy him. The sale will be announced at the trials, he said, and if you resist, I shall ensure the War Office knows exactly who endangered the king's horses. Eleanor picked up the report and examined the seal pressed into the red wax. The impression was nearly perfect, but one detail betrayed it. The Hawthorne branch curved left instead of right. A copy, she said, competent enough to deceive a clerk, but not the woman who designed the original. Julian's jaw tightened. You will have an opportunity to defend yourself before the War Office. No, you intend to announce my guilt publicly before anyone examines the evidence. By the time I am heard, the farm will belong to the Vales. Lord Vale's manager, Mr. Silas Crowe, adjusted his cuffs. The sale merely protects His Grace from the consequences of your negligence. Eleanor turned toward him. "How fortunate that your employer offered to purchase Hawthorne before the alleged negligence became public." Crow's expression did not change, but Seraphina's fingers tightened around the back of her chair. Julian ordered the servants to escort Eleanor from the hall. None moved. Every footman and groom present had been hired, trained, or protected from dismissal by her. Their silence revealed how little authority Julian possessed, without the obedience his wife had maintained for him. "Leave us," Eleanor told them. They obeyed her. When the doors closed, Julian stepped nearer. "Do not humiliate me in my own house. You are selling the work of 12 years to pay debts you concealed from me, using an accusation you know has not been investigated. I know the estate is nearly insolvent. Because you mortgaged the western farms to finance your racing stable." His face hardened. She had discovered the first loan 6 months earlier, but not the others. Julian had promised then that there would be no more secrets. For a brief, foolish time, Eleanor had believed him. Seraphina rose. "Julian is trying to save the tenants from losing their homes." Eleanor looked at her. "And your family's generosity requires you to receive Hawthorne Stud. My father intends to modernize it. Your father breeds carriage horses." A faint flush appeared beneath Seraphina's powder. Julian placed himself between them. "Enough. Until the trials, you are forbidden to enter the stables or communicate with the grooms." Eleanor slipped the false report into her reticule. "That document belongs to me," he said. "It accuses me. I shall keep it." He seized her wrist. For one terrible instant, the room became silent. Julian had never struck her, but his grip revealed something almost worse. He believed marriage still entitled him to restrain her body while he destroyed her name. Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "Remove your hand." He released her, though slowly. That choice ended what remained of her loyalty. She left Ashford Hall before sunset with one trunk, the blue bottle, the forged report, and her private breeding journals. She did not go to her father's house, where Julian would expect to find her. Instead, she took rooms at Harcourt Lodge, a small property belonging to Marcus, 3 miles from Hawthorne. Her brother arrived from London shortly after midnight. Colonel Marcus Harcourt entered, wearing a travel-stained red coat and carrying a leather dispatch case. He was 5 years older than Eleanor, broad-shouldered, controlled, and rarely angry in any manner that could be seen. Yet, when he read Julian's report, a pulse moved in his temple. "He accused you of knowingly certifying sick horses? He intends to sell the farm before I can answer." Marcus inspected the wax. "This might deceive the procurement office. It already has." He opened his dispatch case and removed 12 transport orders. Each carried Eleanor's name. 8 listed horses she had never approved. 4 authorized deliveries from stables that did not exist. "The orders began appearing 10 weeks ago," Marcus said. "All were countersigned by Rupert Dacre. Payment went to Hawthorne's account, then disappeared within 48 hours. Where? A private bank used by Vale and Company." Eleanor placed the blue bottle beneath the lamp. "Then Seraphina's family is not merely buying the farm. They have been using its name to sell rejected horses to the Crown." Marcus shook his head. "The numbers are too large. Vale could obtain unhealthy animals anywhere. What he needs from Hawthorne is your reputation." And Julian handed it to him. Marcus did not soften the truth. "Yes." The following morning, Dr. Pembroke examined the residue inside the bottle. His conclusion offered neither comfort nor certainty. The liquid was not poison, but a powerful stimulant used to make weak horses appear energetic for several hours. Repeated doses could produce fever, heart failure, and violent collapse. Someone could parade an exhausted animal before buyers, Eleanor said, then deliver it before the symptoms appeared. Pembroke nodded. If these horses enter military service, they may fail beneath riders during a charge. Eleanor's anger became cold and useful. She wrote 3 instructions. The first ordered her grooms to record every sick animal in duplicate. The second directed her family's solicitors to locate the original purchase deeds for Hawthorne's breeding stock. The third asked Marcus to suspend all contracts, but only after the public sale was announced. "You want Julian to believe he has won?" Marcus observed. "I want every officer at the trials to witness exactly what he chooses when given one final chance." That evening, Thomas Reed arrived at Harcourt Lodge through the kitchen entrance. Mud covered his boots, and blood darkened one sleeve. "Mr. Dacre caught me copying the stable list," he whispered. "He knows someone spoke to you." Eleanor drew him toward the fire. "Did he hurt you?" Thomas shook his head, though the bruise along his jaw answered for him. Then he pulled a folded transport schedule from inside his coat. 40 horses leave after the trials," he said, "but that is not all. I heard Mr. Crow tell Dacre that once Lady Seraphina owns Hawthorne, they will destroy the sick animals and blame the outbreak on your breeding program." Eleanor opened the schedule. Each horse had been assigned to the 12th Dragoons. Beside 6 names was a small black cross. Patience was among them. At the bottom appeared a second instruction written in Dacre's hand. "If the Duchess challenges the sale, release the infected mares into the public trial enclosure." More than 200 officers, soldiers, servants, and spectators would be standing beside it. Eleanor read the instruction twice before folding it along its original crease. "If they release 6 fevered mares into a crowded enclosure," Marcus said, "someone could be killed. That is what Crow is counting on. A public disaster would make the accusation against me impossible to erase." "We can arrest Dacre now." "With what proof? A stolen schedule carried here by a frightened stable boy?" "Dacre will deny writing it. Crow will say Thomas fabricated everything at my request." Thomas went pale. Eleanor placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You have done nothing wrong. But if we act too soon, they will destroy the ledgers and replace Dacre with another man." Marcus understood her intention. "You mean to let the sale proceed?" "I mean to let Julian stand before the officers and choose whether to repeat a lie he has had 11 days to question. And if he does, then I shall stop protecting him from the consequences." Eleanor ordered Thomas to remain at Harcourt Lodge under Marcus's protection. Meanwhile, Dr. Pembroke prepared written findings on the stimulant, and 2 military veterinarians quietly traveled from London to examine the horses after the trials began. For the next 9 days, Eleanor stayed away from Hawthorne. Her absence did more damage than Julian had anticipated. 3 experienced grooms resigned after Dacre ignored their quarantine requests. A broodmare miscarried because no one recognized the early signs of distress. Buyers withdrew from the private auction when Eleanor's signature failed to appear on the catalogue. Julian sent her 6 letters. The first ordered her to return. The second warned that continued disobedience would be treated as abandonment of her marital duties. The third promised to withdraw the accusation if she publicly approved the sale. Eleanor burned none of them. She numbered each envelope and locked them inside Marcus's dispatch case. The 6th letter arrived on the evening before the trials. Julian came with it. Eleanor found him standing alone in the drawing room at Harcourt Lodge. He looked exhausted. The immaculate confidence he wore before Seraphina had vanished, leaving the man Eleanor had once known, the younger son who had inherited a ruined dukedom and admitted, on their wedding night, that he feared failing everyone who depended upon him. For an instant, grief moved through her. Then she remembered his hand around her wrist. "You should not have come here," she said. "You left me no choice." "No, Julian, you had many choices. You dismissed Pembroke. You gave Dacre authority. You concealed your debts. You signed a sale before investigating a forged report. I am trying to save Ashford. By sacrificing me," he turned toward the window, "Lord Vale will clear every mortgage if Hawthorne passes to Seraphina." The use of her Christian name confirmed what Eleanor had refused to ask. "How long?" Julian said nothing. "How long has she been your mistress?" "Do not make this vulgar." "It became vulgar when you seated her in my place and offered her my work." He faced her then. "Seraphina understands the obligations of my rank. She does not challenge me before servants or contradict every decision I make. She flatters you while her father empties your accounts." His expression hardened. "There is the woman I came to see. Cold, superior, incapable of yielding even when our home is at stake." Eleanor crossed to the writing desk and placed the false report before him. "The seal is counterfeit. The branch faces the wrong direction. Ask any engraver." Julian looked at it but did not touch it. She gave him the transport orders next. "These authorize payments to invented stables. The money entered your account before being transferred to Vale and Company. Ask your own banker." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Eleanor offered him one last path away from ruin. "Postpone the sale. Quarantine the horses. Invite the War Office to investigate both of us publicly. If I am guilty, I will surrender Hawthorne without protest. And if you are not, you will announce before the same witnesses that you accused your wife without evidence." His hesitation lasted long enough to reveal the truth. Julian feared public humiliation more than he feared sending compromised horses to soldiers. "Vale's money arrives when the deed is transferred," he said. "I cannot postpone it." "You can. You refuse to." He gathered the documents, but Eleanor covered them with her hand. "These are copies. Marcus has the originals." Julian stared at her. "You brought your brother into our marriage. You brought the War Office into it when you forged my guilt." The next morning, cavalry officers, breeders, and neighboring families filled the Hawthorne trial ground. Scarlet uniforms surrounded the white rails. Julian stood upon the viewing platform beside Lord Vale and Seraphina, who wore Eleanor's silver whistle before she had any right to possess it. Eleanor arrived with Marcus as the first horses entered the enclosure. A murmur spread through the crowd. Julian began his announcement. His voice carried clearly across the yard as he accused his wife of falsifying records and endangering the Crown's cavalry. Then, before Eleanor's own grooms, he signed away Hawthorne Stud and placed its deed in Seraphina's hands. Eleanor felt something inside her become perfectly still. She stepped forward and withdrew her guarantee from every Ashford contract. Marcus handed the suspension order to Julian. At that moment, a sharp whistle sounded from behind the south stable. Not Eleanor's whistle, Seraphina's. 6 stall doors flew open. The fevered mares charged toward the crowded trial enclosure, and tied to Patience's saddle was a leather case bearing Eleanor's name. The 6 mares burst from the south stable in a storm of flying reins, striking hooves and white foam. Spectators recoiled against the rails. An officer lost his footing beneath the crush, while a young drummer stood frozen in the center of the enclosure, directly in Patience's path. Eleanor vaulted over the barrier. "Open the eastern gate," she shouted. "Do not chase them. Give them somewhere to run." Her former grooms moved before Julian's new men understood the order. Samuel Price pulled the side gate wide, while two others stretched a canvas screen along the rail, creating a passage toward the empty training field. Patience kept charging toward the drummer. Eleanor stepped into the mare's path and lowered her hands. Every instinct warned her to move, but frightened horses did not obey force. They followed what they recognized. "Easy, Patience," she said, using the low phrase she had repeated during the mare's first difficult foaling. "Come to me." The mare's ears shifted. For half a second, memory overcame whatever burned through her blood. Eleanor caught the trailing rein and turned Patience's head away from the boy. The leather tore across her palm, but she ran beside the mare until Patience entered the open passage. The other 5 followed. Samuel closed the gate behind them before any animal reached the crowd. Only then did Eleanor look toward the viewing platform. Seraphina remained beside Julian, one hand pressed dramatically to her bare throat. The silver whistle was gone. "Someone tore it from me during the panic," she cried. The Duchess's people must have planned this. Julian seized upon the accusation at once. "Search the grooms." "No one moves," General Sir Henry Talbot commanded. 2 military veterinarians Marcus had quietly summoned stepped from among the officers. Their arrival changed the noise of the yard into wary silence. Rupert Dacre pushed through the spectators carrying the leather case that had been tied to Patience's saddle. "This was fastened to the mare," he announced. "It bears the Duchess's name." He opened it before General Talbot. Inside lay 3 blue bottles, several certificates carrying Eleanor's signature, and a small ledger stamped with her initials. The evidence was neat, visible, and ready to be understood by men who wanted a simple culprit. Julian looked at Eleanor. "You threatened to destroy the sale. I warned you that someone had stolen my seal, and now your medicines are tied to diseased horses in front of 200 witnesses." Eleanor took one of the bottles without opening it. A thread of fresh straw clung to the wax around its neck. "These did not come from my rooms," she said. Dacre smiled. "Naturally, you would say that. The bottle I recovered 11 days ago had 2 cuts in its cork. These are unopened." Whoever packed this case did not expect an examination. He expected an audience. She turned to General Talbot. "Place the horses under military quarantine. Examine the contents of their stomachs, their brands, and every certificate issued under my name. Until that is done, no animal should leave Hawthorne." Talbot looked toward Julian. "Do you consent to an immediate inspection?" Julian glanced at the deed in Seraphina's hands. If he consented, payment for the sale would be withheld. Without it, his creditors could act before the week ended. "The farm no longer belongs to me," he said. "Lady Seraphina must decide." Disapproval moved openly across the officers' faces. Minutes earlier, Julian had claimed authority over Hawthorne while condemning his wife. Now, with soldiers' lives at risk, he surrendered that authority to his mistress. Seraphina lifted her chin. "I will not allow Eleanor to ruin the property merely because Julian chose me to manage it." "Then the inspection will proceed without your permission," Talbot said. He ordered soldiers to close every gate and secure the record room. Payments and deliveries connected to Hawthorne would be temporarily suspended pending veterinary examination. A murmur moved through the creditors standing below the platform. Julian's face changed. "Temporarily? No funds will be released while fraudulent certification is suspected." Lord Vale's manager, Silas Crowe, slipped away from the viewing stand. Marcus noticed, and quietly sent 2 officers after him. Eleanor entered the training field with Dr. Pembroke. Patience trembled beneath a wet blanket, her heart striking violently against her ribs. As Pembroke collected a sample from her feed bag, Eleanor examined the black mare beside her. The Hawthorne mark had been burned high on its flank. Too high. She rubbed away the dark dye surrounding it. Beneath the fresh scar, another brand emerged. 3 joined circles. Samuel inhaled sharply. "I know that mark," he said. "Vale's Northern Auction Yard. They sell pit horses and carriage stock after everyone else rejects them." Eleanor looked back toward Seraphina. The missing whistle could be explained away. The bottles could be planted. Even the certificates might be dismissed as a wife's revenge. But a discarded Vale horse, carrying a fresh Hawthorne brand, could not have appeared by accident. Before Eleanor could speak, Marcus returned from the record room, holding a transport book. 87 horses have already been delivered under your seal," he said, "and 12 were purchased from the same northern yard." He turned the page toward her. The next 40 were scheduled to leave Hawthorne before dawn. Eleanor examined the transport book beneath the stable lantern. The next 40 horses were listed for delivery to the 12th Dragoons. Each certificate bore her name. Each had been approved by Dacre and countersigned by Julian 2 days earlier. At the bottom of the page, a final instruction ordered the animals moved to Vale's roadside depot before dawn, where they would be beyond Hawthorne's quarantine gates. "They planned for the inspection to fail," Eleanor said. "The horses in this yard were meant to disgrace me." The valuable shipment was always leaving by another road. General Talbot immediately sent cavalrymen to secure the western gate and the path leading toward the depot. Then he authorized Eleanor and the military veterinarians to inspect every animal named in the earlier deliveries. They worked inside the north stable while Julian watched from the entrance. Of the 143 horses registered at Hawthorne, Eleanor identified 26 she had never bred or purchased. Several had altered teeth to make them appear younger. Others carried scars concealed beneath dye. On 4 animals, the Hawthorne mark had been burned directly over Vale's 3 joined circles. Dr. Pembroke examined a gray gelding whose left foreleg trembled whenever it bore weight. This animal could collapse beneath a rider without warning. Eleanor recognized him immediately. Resolute. She had rejected the gelding 6 months earlier after discovering damage to the tendon. Her original journal recorded the examination and her order that he never be sold for military use. Marcus searched the transport book. His expression changed. Resolute is not here. Where was he sent? Marcus turned the ledger toward her. The gelding had been delivered 3 weeks earlier to Captain Edward Harcourt, Marcus's only son. For the first time that day, Eleanor saw fear break through her brother's discipline. Edward's regiment sailed for France 3 days ago. General Talbot ordered an urgent dispatch sent to Dover and another through the Admiralty signal stations. Every regiment that had received horses carrying Eleanor's seal would be instructed to remove them from service until inspected, but the list contained 87 names. The warning could prevent further injuries. It could not undo what had already happened. Julian stepped closer. "I did not know Resolute had been rejected." "You signed the delivery authorization," Eleanor said. "Dacre prepared it. And I warned you that Dacre was altering my records. I believed you were trying to obstruct the sale. You believed what protected your pride." Her voice remained quiet, forcing him to hear every word. "You knew my seal was missing. You knew the report against me had not been investigated. I showed you the defect in the counterfeit impression. You still signed 40 more certificates because Vale's money was more important to you than discovering whether the horses were safe." Julian looked toward Seraphina as though expecting her to defend him. She stood beside the platform with Lord Vale's manager, speaking urgently beneath her breath. When she noticed Julian watching, she approached with carefully measured concern. "My father purchased horses through many yards," she said. If Dacre deceived us, then we are victims as well. Eleanor held out Resolute's original rejection entry. The Vale Yard bought this gelding after I declared him unfit. Someone concealed his injury, replaced his brand, and sold him under my name. Seraphina did not touch the journal. You cannot prove my father knew. Not yet. A military courier reached Hawthorne shortly before sunset. His horse was white with foam, and the dispatch case at his side bore the seal of the War Office. Marcus broke the wax. The report had been sent from Dover before General Talbot's warning arrived. 3 horses supplied under the Hawthorne name had collapsed during the regiment's final exercises. 5 soldiers were injured. Captain Edward Harcourt had been thrown when Resolute's damaged foreleg failed. Marcus stopped reading. Eleanor took the page from him. Edward was alive, but his leg had been broken in 2 places. The surgeon could not yet say whether he would ride again. Julian removed his hat. Marcus, You do not get to offer me sorrow as though you were standing outside this, Marcus said. Your signature placed my son on that horse. I did not know it was dangerous. You chose not to know. The words silenced the stable. Eleanor folded the dispatch and returned it to her brother. Her anger no longer belonged only to the woman Julian had humiliated. 12 soldiers had trusted certificates carrying her name. 5 had now paid for his refusal to examine the truth. A groom ran through the north door. Your Grace, the western paddock is empty. General Talbot turned sharply. The 40 horses? Gone. Dacre moved them before the soldiers reached the gate. Eleanor seized the transport book. Beside the Vale depot entry was a second destination she had overlooked, an abandoned toll road leading directly to the military highway. If the convoy reached it, the horses could be divided among separate wagons and disappear before midnight. Eleanor looked at Marcus. Send Talbot's men to the depot, she said. Dacre expects soldiers. And you? She closed the ledger. I know the road he will use to avoid them. Eleanor rode toward the abandoned toll road with Samuel and 6 former Hawthorne grooms. She had used the route years earlier to move broodmares during flooding. The path narrowed between a chalk embankment and an old stone bridge, leaving no space for a large convoy to turn. If Dacre reached the military highway, the 40 horses would disappear into separate shipments. If Eleanor reached the bridge first, he would have to pass through her. They arrived as the first wagon lanterns appeared between the trees. Dacre rode ahead of 8 hired men. Behind him, the horses had been tied in groups of 5 and forced along the muddy road. Several stumbled from exhaustion. Others tossed their heads with the same unnatural agitation Eleanor had seen in Patience. Dacre pulled his horse to a halt. You have no authority here. Eleanor remained in the center of the bridge. Those animals are under military quarantine. The order applies to Hawthorne. These horses left before it was issued. You moved them after General Talbot sealed the gates. Prove it. Thomas Reed stepped from behind Samuel. I saw you change the time in the transport book, he said, and I recorded every wagon before you left. Dacre's hand moved toward the pistol beneath his coat. Eleanor did not retreat. If you fire, Talbot's cavalry will hear it. If you turn back, they will meet you at the depot. Your only escape is to abandon the horses and explain why a master of horse fled from animals he claims are fit for soldiers. Dacre looked behind him. His hired men had begun to understand that protecting him might lead them to a military prison. One dropped his lead rope, then another. Dacre wheeled his horse toward a narrow track beside the bridge. Samuel tried to catch the bridle, but Dacre struck him with his riding crop and escaped into the woods. Eleanor let him go. The 40 horses mattered more. She and the grooms separated the sick animals, removed the false certificates, and led the convoy back toward Hawthorne. General Talbot's soldiers met them halfway. Among the seized papers was an authorization allowing the shipment to leave before inspection. It carried Julian's signature. He was waiting in the courtyard when Eleanor returned. "I signed that yesterday," he said, "before the quarantine. You authorized Dacre to move the horses without my examination. Vale required delivery before releasing the purchase money, and you agreed." Julian looked at the exhausted animals passing between them. One gray mare stumbled to her knees before a groom helped her rise. "I thought they had already been inspected. By the man I warned you was altering my records." He lowered his voice. "I never intended for anyone to be hurt." Intent does not erase a signature. General Talbot ordered the rescued horses secured and sent men to search for Dacre. Thomas gave a formal statement describing the altered departure time and identified the drivers who had assisted him. The drivers quickly began blaming one another. By midnight, two admitted that Dacre had ordered them to move the horses before the military officers finished examining the records. They also revealed that Silas Crow had burned a packet of invoices at Vale's depot before disappearing. The originals were gone, but Eleanor remembered something Crow did not know. Military payments did not exist only in estate ledgers. Her family's bank had processed Hawthorne's cavalry income for 12 years. Every deposit and transfer had been copied into its London books. She sent Marcus a list of the dates and fictitious stables. By morning, his reply arrived. The pattern was unmistakable. Payments from the War Office entered Julian's estate account. Within 48 hours, most of the money was transferred to Vale and Company as loan fees. Each fraudulent sale temporarily kept Julian's creditors away while increasing Vale's claim over Ashford. They were lending him the Crown's own stolen money, Eleanor said, and preparing to seize everything when the fraud became public, Marcus replied. A carriage entered the yard shortly after sunrise. Lord Vale stepped down carrying a leather portfolio. He did not ask about his missing manager, his daughter, or the rescued horses. He asked to speak with Julian alone. Before the study door closed, Eleanor saw the document inside the portfolio. It was a prepared testimony accusing her of directing every fraudulent sale. If Julian signed it, Lord Vale would postpone foreclosure on Ashford Hall. Lord Vale placed the prepared testimony on Julian's desk. It stated that Duchess Eleanor had personally controlled Hawthorne's military sales, authorized the purchase of rejected horses, and transferred the profits through her husband's accounts without his knowledge. In exchange for Julian's signature, Vale would suspend foreclosure on Ashford Hall for 1 year. "You can preserve your title, your home, and the villages dependent upon you," Vale said, "or you can allow your wife to destroy them for the satisfaction of proving herself right." Julian looked at the final page. The lie had been written carefully. It did not claim that Eleanor acted alone. It blamed Dacre for altering the horses and accused Eleanor only of creating the system that allowed the fraud. Enough truth had been woven through it to survive an initial examination. Seraphina stood beside her father. "Eleanor has already abandoned you," she said. "She withdrew the guarantee knowing the estate would collapse. Why should you sacrifice everything to protect her?" "I would not be protecting her?" "No," Vale replied. "You would be protecting the woman who intends to take Hawthorne from you." He placed a pen beside the document. Julian remembered Eleanor standing at Harcourt Lodge, offering him one final chance to postpone the sale. She had shown him the defective seal, the invented stables, and the transfers into Vale and Company. He had not doubted the evidence. He had feared what accepting it would require him to admit. Julian lifted the pen. Then he saw the military report Marcus had left on the corner of the desk. 5 soldiers injured. Edward Harcourt's leg broken. Other regiments awaiting inspection. If Julian signed, those men would become proof of Eleanor's supposed guilt. His wife would lose her reputation, Hawthorne, and perhaps her freedom, not because the evidence condemned her, but because he had chosen the lie that preserved his property. Once, that choice would have seemed necessary. Now he understood that necessity was the name he gave to cowardice when it wore his own face. He set down the pen. No. Seraphina stared at him. Think carefully. I have spent months doing nothing else but choosing whatever protected me from the consequences of my decisions. Vale's expression remained calm. Without my forbearance, the bank will claim Ashford Hall within days. Then it will be claimed. You will become a duke without an estate. I may already deserve less. Seraphina stepped toward him. After everything I risked for you? Julian looked at the woman he had admired because she never contradicted him. You stole Eleanor's seal. I did what was necessary to save you. You helped your father place fraudulent payments in my accounts. You signed every transfer. The words came too quickly. Julian's attention sharpened. You knew what the payments were. Seraphina glanced toward Lord Vale. That single look answered him. Vale closed the portfolio. You are confusing an opportunity to survive with an invitation to develop a conscience. I will not offer it twice. He and Seraphina left without another word. Julian remained alone in the study. He felt no relief. Refusing one final lie did not undo the many choices that had brought the document to his desk. Eleanor never learned of his refusal from him. She spent the morning at Hawthorne, arranging independent examinations for the rescued horses. Her solicitors confirmed that the valuable breeding stock had been purchased through her marriage settlement and remained inside a trust for her exclusive benefit. Julian had owned the land beneath Hawthorne, but not most of the bloodlines he had attempted to give Seraphina. Eleanor could invalidate the sale. She could not yet prevent Julian's legitimate creditors from seizing the land. When he approached her outside Patience's stall, he stopped several feet away. Vale offered to preserve Ashford if I accused you, he said. I refused. Eleanor continued cleaning the cut across her palm. Do you expect gratitude? No. Then why tell me? Because I am beginning to understand that silence is one of the ways I lied. She met his eyes. You refused today because Vale's deception finally threatened you. I asked you to refuse 11 days ago, when only my name and the soldiers were in danger. Julian accepted the judgment without defending himself. Is there anything I can do? Tell the truth when it costs you everything. Then ask for nothing in return. Before he could answer, General Talbot entered the stable with 2 soldiers. Seraphina had submitted a sworn statement. She claimed Dacre had acted under Julian's private orders, and that Julian had used Eleanor's stolen seal to conceal the fraud from both women. The Crown inquiry would open at Hawthorne in 3 days. Julian was no longer merely the husband who had ignored the conspiracy. He was now its principal accused. The 3 days before the inquiry dismantled what remained of Julian's authority. The bank demanded payment of the Ashford mortgage. Merchants closed his accounts. Servants asked whether their wages would be paid, and tenants gathered outside the estate office, fearing that Lord Vale would seize their farms. Eleanor could have stopped the collapse with one letter to her family's bank. She did not rescue Julian. Instead, she used money protected by her marriage settlement to pay the servants and purchase grain for the villages. His gambling losses, concealed loans, and personal mortgages remained untouched. "You are preserving everything around me while allowing me to fall," Julian said. "The tenants did not forge my name. The servants did not sell sick horses. Protecting them does not require me to protect you." He had no answer. Eleanor spent the remaining time constructing a chain of proof that did not depend on any single witness. Dr. Pembroke documented the stimulant found in the horses. Samuel identified the Vale brands beneath the Hawthorne marks. Thomas recorded the altered departure time and named the drivers. Marcus obtained certified banking copies showing military payments entering Julian's account before passing to Vale and Company. Finally, Eleanor's solicitor brought the original trust documents from London. "The foundation mares and breeding stallions were purchased through your settlement," he explained. "The Duke owned the land, but he never possessed the bloodlines that gave Hawthorne its value. Julian had attempted to sell property that was not legally his. The transfer to Seraphina could be voided, but the solicitor offered no false comfort. Hawthorne's land remains pledged against legitimate Ashford debts. If those creditors foreclose, the trust will own horses without a home." Eleanor studied the mortgages. Her family could purchase the oldest debt and take priority over every later creditor. It would cost nearly all the capital remaining in her trust. Marcus understood the risk. "You could secure the bloodlines elsewhere." "I built Hawthorne," Eleanor replied. "Julian does not get to decide that I must abandon it simply because he tried to give it away." She authorized the purchase. The inquiry opened the next morning inside Hawthorne's auction hall. Officers, creditors, breeders, tenants, and newspaper correspondents filled the benches. Seraphina entered beside Lord Vale and 3 barristers. Her statement accused Julian of directing the fraud while keeping both women ignorant. Julian sat alone. General Talbot called the proceedings to order and announced that the inquiry would determine responsibility for 87 disputed cavalry sales, 12 injured soldiers, falsified inspection records, and the attempted removal of quarantined horses. Eleanor placed her original seal, breeding journals, bank records, and trust documents on the table before her. General Talbot looked across the crowded hall. "Duchess Eleanor Ashford, you were publicly accused of endangering the king's cavalry. You may now answer that accusation." Eleanor rose before the same people who had watched Julian give away her farm. This time, no one interrupted her. Eleanor began with the counterfeit seal. She placed it beside the genuine one and showed the panel the reversed Hawthorne branch. Every disputed certificate carried the same defect. Dr. Pembroke then described the stimulant used to disguise weak horses. Samuel identified Vale's 3-circle brand beneath the fresh Hawthorne marks, while Thomas testified that Dacre had altered the transport time and removed 40 horses after quarantine began. Marcus presented the banking records. Military payments had entered Julian's estate account before passing to Vale and Company as restructuring fees. Lord Vale had used stolen crown money to keep Ashford solvent while increasing Julian's debt to him. Vale's barrister rose. "All these transfers bear the Duke's approval. Where is the proof that Lord Vale knew the horses were unfit?" Eleanor produced the letter Julian had received before the sale. Vale had warned that payment would be withheld unless Julian allowed Dacre to move the horses without her inspection. Lord Vale dismissed it as an ordinary commercial demand. "Then why," Eleanor asked, "did your northern yard sell Resolute after my records declared him unfit?" She placed the Vale purchase entry beside Edward's delivery certificate. The dates, price, altered brand, and false inspection formed an unbroken chain. Seraphina changed her defense immediately. My father and Dacre handled the horses. Julian controlled the accounts. I believed Eleanor's seal was being used with her permission. "You wore my whistle when the deed was transferred," Eleanor said. "How did you obtain it?" Seraphina remained silent. General Talbot turned to Julian. "Did Duchess Eleanor warn you that her seal had been stolen?" "Yes." "Did she show you evidence of false orders before you sold Hawthorne?" "Yes." "Did Lord Vale require you to bypass her inspection?" "Yes." The hall became still. Julian faced the officers and tenants. I did not know the full scheme, but I knew the records were disputed, and I chose not to investigate. I needed Vale's money. I resented my wife's authority, and I preferred an accusation that made her appear disloyal. He looked toward Eleanor. She did not endanger the cavalry. I did, by signing what I refused to question. His confession destroyed Seraphina's attempt to place the entire conspiracy upon him while confirming his own guilt. General Talbot ruled Eleanor's public accusation unsupported and declared the transfer of her bloodlines invalid. Vale, Seraphina, Dacre, and Crowe would face criminal proceedings. Julian's contracts and accounts would remain suspended pending restitution. But Hawthorne's land was still mortgaged. Eleanor's solicitor placed the purchased first mortgage before her. With one signature, she could foreclose, remove Hawthorne permanently from Julian's control, and force the sale of his remaining estates. Julian saw the document. This time, he did not ask her to spare him. Eleanor lifted the pen. Eleanor signed the foreclosure order. Hawthorne's land passed to her family's bank, which leased it to a trust under her exclusive control. Julian could no longer sell the farm, mortgage its bloodlines, or use Eleanor's name to secure another contract. General Talbot then announced the findings. Lord Vale had organized the purchase of rejected horses, concealed their defects, and sold them to the military through Hawthorne's reputation. His accounts and northern yards were frozen pending criminal trial and restitution. Seraphina was charged with forgery, theft of Eleanor's seal, conspiracy to defraud the crown, and assisting the unlawful removal of quarantined horses. Dacre and Crowe would stand trial beside her. Julian had not designed the scheme, but his choices had made it possible. He had accepted unexplained money, ignored evidence of forgery, bypassed inspections, and publicly accused Eleanor after she warned him. Every Ashford military contract was permanently revoked. Julian was ordered to return the fraudulent payments that had passed through his accounts. Ashford Hall and the Western farms would be sold to satisfy his legitimate creditors. His title remained. Almost nothing beneath it did. Before the inquiry closed, Julian stood before the officers, tenants, servants, and newspaper correspondents. "My accusations against Duchess Eleanor were false," he said. "She warned me that her seal had been stolen and that the records were corrupted. I proceeded because I needed Vale's money, and because defeating my wife mattered more to me than discovering whether she was right." He did not blame Seraphina for deceiving him. "She succeeded because she told me what my pride wanted to hear. Eleanor's judgment did not diminish me. I diminished myself by punishing her for possessing it." The newspapers printed his correction in full. Within a month, Hawthorne reopened under Eleanor's authority. Every groom who had followed her returned. Thomas became apprentice keeper of the breeding records, Samuel supervised the stables, and Dr. Pembroke established an independent veterinary ward. Captain Edward returned from France on crutches. His leg would heal, though he might never ride with the same ease again. Restitution from the Vale properties was reserved for him and the other injured soldiers. Julian moved into a modest house on the last unpledged portion of the Ashford estate. He signed a formal separation agreement granting Eleanor her own residence, income, and complete control of Hawthorne. He asked for no forgiveness. Before leaving, he met her beside Patience's stall and placed the stable keys on the ledge. "I once believed your strength made me less of a man." "No," Eleanor replied, "your choices did that." He accepted the answer and walked away alone. The following spring, military officers returned to Hawthorne, not to negotiate with the Duke of Ashford, but to sign a new contract with Eleanor's trust. Independent veterinarians examined every horse, and every certificate carried a newly engraved seal. Patience waited beside the open training field with her recovered foal. Eleanor lifted the silver whistle Seraphina had once worn as a trophy. One clear note crossed the yard. The gates opened at Eleanor's command, and no man would ever again possess the right to sell her voice.